Hi. Today, in the myth of Logos, the sailor who fell into warm water at night. Avicenna's flying man argument. Bahram went overboard in the middle of the night, in the middle of a calm sea, and by the time anyone on deck noticed the splash, the ship had already carried too far past him in the dark to turn back before morning. He was, by luck alone, not going to drown. The water that night was strangely warm, warmer than his own skin, and so still that he could not feel it moving against him at all. There was no moon, there was no wind to carry sound. He kept himself afloat without effort, arms and legs spread wide so that no limb brushed another. And after the first hour of shouting had gone unanswered, he stopped shouting because there was no longer anyone to shout for. What happened to him after that was stranger than the shipwreck itself. He could not see anything, no horizon, no stars. Cloud must have come in low. Clouds. He could not feel the water because it matched the warmth of his own body so exactly that his skin reported nothing where it touched him. He could not hear his own breathing over what little there was to hear it against. No ship's creak, no gull, nothing. His limbs, spread and unmoving, no longer told him anything either, because touching nothing and touching each other were the only two ways a limb usually tells you it's there, and he had arranged, without meaning to, that neither was happening. For the length of that night, Bahram had no sensation at all that would tell him he had a body. If he tried to picture his own hands, he found he could no longer be certain the picture came from anything real. Perhaps his hands had been lost in the fall. Perhaps they'd never been the shape he remembered. Perhaps the whole ship and the whole voyage before it had been some fever he was only now waking from. He doubted his arms, he doubted his legs. He found, turning it over and over in the dark, that he could doubt the existence of every single part of his body, one after another, without running into anything that stopped the doubting. And yet, somewhere in the middle of doubting, all of it, he noticed something the doubting itself could not touch. Whatever was doing the doubting, whatever was lying there in the water turning the question over, wondering if its own hands were real, that thing was undeniably and immediately there. He did not need to feel his skin to know that he existed. He did not need to see his hands to know there was a him who was uncertain about his hands. The uncertainty itself required a someone to be uncertain. Strip away every sensation his body could possibly report, and Bahram found, floating in the dark, that what was left over was not nothing. It was the surest thing he had ever known, more certain than the ship, more certain than the sea, more certain than his own two arms, which he genuinely for the length of that night could not prove he still had. He was found near dawn, badly sunburned, and half mad with thirst, and he told the story afterward more times than his crewmates wanted to hear it, always ending on the same insistence that a man could lose every last thread connecting him to his body, sight, touch, hearing, even the felt weight of his own limbs, and still underneath all of it know for certain that he existed. Not because he'd reasoned his way to it, because it had never actually depended on the body at all. Bahram's Night in the Water isn't really about a shipwreck. It's a narrative staging of one of the most striking thought experiments in medieval philosophy, the flying man, sometimes translated as floating man, argument, devised by the Persian polymath Ibn Sina, known in the Latin West as Avicenna, most fully developed In his massive philosophical encyclopedia, Kitab al-Shifa, the Book of Healing, and restated in al-Isharat wal Tanbihat, remarks and admonitions. Avicenna is often called, alongside his predecessor Al-Farabi, one of the great inheritors and systematizers of Aristotelian philosophy in the Islamic world, a figure whose sheer range of output across logic, metaphysics, psychology, and medicine, his canon of medicine remained a standard European textbook for centuries, earned him comparisons to Aristotle himself as a totalizing systematic mind, sometimes explicitly styled the Aristotle of the East, for the way he absorbed, extended, and in places corrected Aristotelian philosophy for an entirely new intellectual world. Avicenna's own version of the thought experiment asks you to imagine a person created instantaneously, fully formed and fully rational, but suspended in open air, or in some renderings warm water, blindfolded, limbs spread so that no part of the body touches any other part, and with no sound reaching them at all. A person, in other words, given no sensory contact whatsoever with their own body or the external world. Avicenna's claim is that such a person, despite having no sensory basis for it, would still immediately and necessarily affirm one thing, that they exist, that they have a self. They could not be sure in that state that they had hands or feet or a body of any particular shape at all, but they could no doubt, but they could not doubt that there was a they doing the not being sure. The philosophical payload of the argument is that self awareness, the soul's knowledge of its own existence, is immediate, non inferential, and entirely independent of any awareness of the body or the external senses. For Avicenna, this was part of a broader argument for the soul as an immaterial substance distinct from the body. If you can conceive of yourself existing in total detachment from every bodily sensation, then your essential self awareness cannot be identical to or dependent on bodily awareness. The two are not the same thing whatever relationship they otherwise have. Historians of philosophy have long noticed how closely this anticipates a much more famous argument written some 600 years later, Descartes' cogito, the discovery in the Meditations, that even radical doubt about the body, the senses, and the external world cannot touch the bare fact of a thinking thing doing the doubting. Whether Descartes had any direct textual knowledge of Avicenna's argument remains disputed among scholars. Avicenna's psychology was transmitted into the Latin scholastic tradition through translations and commentators for centuries before Descartes' education at La Flèche. But the structural kinship between the flying man and the cogito is close enough that the two are regularly taught side by side as two culturally distant arrivals at strikingly the same insight that the mind's certainty of its own existence runs deeper than any certainty it can have about the body it happens to occupy. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. See you next time.